Ego and Archetype, Part 7. It's going to come out much better now on the mic. It's almost been a year. So just a quick recap of what the chapters were called. So chapter 1 was the inflated ego. Chapter 2 was the alienated ego. And now we are at the stage of the psychic lifestyle where the ego comes to the encounter with the self. As always, we start with the quote. I look on this life as the progress of an essence royal. The soul but quits her court to see the country. Heaven has in it a scene of earth, and had she been contented with ideas, she had not travelled beyond the map. But excellent patterns commend their mimes. But while she scans their symmetry, she forms it. Thus her descent speaks her original. God, in love with his own beauty, frames a glass to view it by reflection. By Thomas Vogt. Part 1. The role of the collective. We have seen that the states of inflation and alienation, both being parts of the psychic life cycle, tend to turn into something else. The inflated state, when acted out, leads to a fall and hence to alienation. The alienated condition, likewise, under normal circumstances, leads over to the state of healing and restitution. Inflation or alienation become dangerous conditions only if they are separated from the life cycle of which they are parts. If either becomes a static, chronic state of being rather than a part of the comprehensive dynamism, the personality is threatened. Psychotherapy is then called for. However, the mass of men have always been protected from the dangers by collective, conventional, and therefore largely unconscious means. The psychic dangers of inflation and alienation, under different names, have always been recognized in the religious practice and folk wisdom of all races and ages. There are many collective and personal rituals which exist for the purpose of avoiding any inflated tendency to tempt God's envy. For instance, we have the age-old practice of knocking on wood when one says things are going well. Behind this is the unconscious or conscious realization that pride and complacency are dangerous. Hence, some procedure must be used to keep one in a humble state. The use of the phrase God willing has the same purpose. The taboos encountered in primitive society in the majority of cases have the same basis, protecting the individual from the inflated state, from contact with powers that would be too big for their limited ego consciousness and that might explode it disastrously. The primitive procedure of isolating victorious warriors when they return from battle serves the same protective function. Victorious warriors may be inflated by victory and might turn their strength against the village itself if they were permitted it. Hence, there is always a few days cooling off period before reintegration into the community takes place. There is an interesting ancient Mithraic ritual called the Rite of the Crown, designed to protect against inflation. Following procedure was enacted during the initiation of a Roman soldier into Mithraism. At sword's point, a crown was offered the candidate, But the initiate was taught to push it aside with his hand and affirm, Mithra is my crown. Thereafter, he never wore a crown or garland, not even at banquets or at military triumphs. And whenever a crown was offered him, he refused it, saying, it belongs to my God. In Zen Buddhism, subtle techniques have been developed for undermining intellectual inflation. The illusion that one knows. One such technique is the use of koans or enigmatic sayings. An example would be a pupil asks his master, do dogs have a Buddha nature? The master replies, bow wow. In the Christian tradition, there is great effort to protect against the inflated state. The 7 deadly sins, pride, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, avarice, and sloth, are all symptoms of inflation. By being labelled sins, which require confession and penance, the individual is protected against them. The basic message of the Beatitudes of Jesus is that blessing will come to the non-inflated personality. There are also many traditional procedures to protect the individual from the alienated state. Understood psychologically, the central aim of all religious practices is to keep the individual, ego, related to the deity, self. All religions are repositories of transpersonal experience and archetypal images. The innate purpose of religious ceremonies of all kinds seems to be to provide the individual with the experience of being related meaningfully to these transpersonal categories. That is the true of the Mass and of the Catholic confessional in a more personal way, where the individual has an opportunity to unburden himself of whatever circumstances have brought about a sense of alienation from God. Through the acceptance of the priest as God's agent, some sense of return to and reconnection with God is established. All religious practices hold up to view the transpersonal categories of existence and attempt to relate them to the individual. Religion is the best collective protection available against both inflation and alienation. So far as we know, every society has had such suprapersonal categories in its collective ritual of life. It is quite doubtful if collective human life can survive for any period without some common shared sense of awareness of these transpersonal categories. It is quite doubtful if collective human life can survive for any period without some common shared sense of awareness of these transpersonal categories. However, although collective methods protect man from dangers of the psychic depths, they also deprive him of the individual experience of these depths and the possibility of development which such experience promotes. As long as a living religion can contain the self and mediate its dynamism for its members, there will be a little need for the individual to have a personal encounter with the self. He will have no need to find his individual relation to the transpersonal dimension. He will have no need to find his individual relation to the transpersonal dimension. That task will be done for him by the Church. This raises a serious question, i.e., whether modern Western society still has a functioning container for suprapersonal categories or archetypes, or As Eliot puts it, do we have no more than a heap of broken images? The fact is that large numbers of individuals do not have living, functioning, suprapersonal categories by which they can understand life experience, supplied either by the church or otherwise. This is a dangerous state of affairs because when such categories do not exist, the ego is likely to think of itself as everything or as nothing. Furthermore, when the archetypes have no adequate container, such as an established religious structure, they have to go somewhere else because the archetypes are facts of psychic life. One possibility is that they will be projected into banal or secular matters. Banal or secular matters. The transpersonal value can then become how high one's standard of living is, or personal power, or some social reform movement, or any one of a number of political activities. This happens in Nazism, the radical right, and in communism, the radical left. The same sort of dynamism can be projected into the race problem, either as racism or anti-racism. The same sort of dynamism can be projected into the race problem, either as racism or anti-racism. Personal, secular, or political actions become charged with unconscious religious meaning. This is particularly dangerous because whenever a religious motivation is acting unconsciously, it causes the fanaticism with all its destructive consequences. When the collective psyche is in a stable state, the vast majority of individuals share a common living myth or deity. Each individual projects his inner God image, the self, to the religion of the community. The collective religion then serves as the container of the self for a multitude of individuals. The reality of the transpersonal life forces is mirrored in the external imagery that the church embodies in its symbolism, mythology, rites, and dogma. As long as it is functioning adequately, the church protects the society against any widespread inflation or alienation. Such a stable state of affairs is represented diagrammatically in Figure 6. Although this situation is stable, it has its defects. The self or God image is still unconscious, i.e., not recognized as an inner psychic entity. Although the community of believers will be in relative harmony with one another because of their shared projection, the harmony is illusory. I feel like he just, he says it so casually. Like it's just... Sorry. Although the community of believers will be in relative harmony with one another because of their shared projection, the harmony is illusory and to the same extent spurious. In relation to the church, the individuals will be in a state of collective identification or participation mystique, and will not have made any unique individual relation to the self. Wow. If now the outer church loses its capacity to carry the projection of the self, we have the condition which Nietzsche announced for the modern world: God is dead. All the psychic energy and values that had been contained in the church now flow back to the individual, activating his psyche and causing serious problems. What will happen now? There are several possibilities, and we see examples of each in contemporary life. See Figure 7. 1. The first possibility is that with the loss of the God projection into the church, the individual will will at the same time lose his inner connection with the self. Case 1 in Figure 7. The individual then succumbs to alienation and all the symptoms of the empty, meaningless life that are so common today. 2. The second possibility is that the individual may take on himself, on his own ego and personal capacities, all the energy previously attached to deity. Case 2, Figure 7. Such a person succumbs to inflation. Examples of this are seen in the hubris that overvalues man's rational and sorry, yeah, I had to skip a couple pages. Such a person succumbs to inflation. Examples of this are seen in the hubris that overvalues man's rational and manipulative powers and denies the sacred mystery inherent in life and nature. The third possibility is that the projected superpersonal value, which has been withdrawn from its religious container, will be reprojected onto some secular or political movement. Case 3. I'm going to put the figures from page 66 and 67. I'll try to put them on the screen so you can pause and really just stare at it. Have a look at the diagrams because that's... hang on. Just have a good look at them. But secular purposes are never an adequate container for religious meaning. When religious energy is applied to a secular object, we have what can be described as idolization, which is spurious, unconscious religion. The outstanding current example of reprojection is the conflict between communism and capitalism. Communism in particular is clearly a secular religion which actively attempts to channel religious energies to secular and social ends. When the value of the self is projected by opposing groups onto conflicting political ideologies, it is as though the original wholeness of the self was split into antithetical fragments which war on each other. In such a case, the I can't say that word. The anomalies of the self or God are acted out in history. Both sides of the partisan conflict derive their energy from the same source, the shared self. But being unconscious of this, they are condemned to live out the tragic conflict in their lives. God himself is caught in the coils of the dark conflict. In every war within Western civilization, both sides have prayed to the same God. As Matthew Arnold put it, and we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Dover Beach. I'm just going to read the last paragraph again. When the value of the self is projected by opposing groups onto conflicting political ideologies, it is as though the original wholeness of the self was split into antithetical fragments which war on each other. In such a case, the animosity and the and antinomies, that's the fucking hardest word of it. In such a case, the antinomies of the self, I thought the T was silent there. The antinomies of the self, or God, are acted out in history. Both sides of the Cartesian conflict derive their energy from the same source, the shared self. But being unconscious of this, they are condemned to live out the tragic conflict in their lives. God himself is caught in the coils of the dark conflict. In every war within Western civilization, both sides have prayed to the same God. The fourth possible way of dealing with the loss of a religious projection is shown in case 4, figure 7. If, when the individual is thrown back on himself through the loss of a projected religious value, he is able to confront the ultimate questions of life that are posed for him, he may be able to use this opportunity for a decisive development in consciousness. If he's able to work consciously and responsibly with the activation of the unconscious, he may discover the lost value, the God image within the psyche. This possibility is represented in the diagram by the circle that now has a larger section of itself outside the arc of unconsciousness. The connection between ego and self is now consciously realized. In this case, the loss of a religious projection has served a salutary purpose. It has been the stimulus which leads to the development of an individual personality. A prominent feature of the collective loss of the suprapersonal categories has been increased preoccupation with the subjectivity of the individual. This is really a modern phenomenon, and indeed could not exist as long as the transpersonal values were satisfactorily contained in a traditional collective religion. But once the traditional symbol system breaks down, it is as if a great surge of energy will return to the individual psyche, and much greater interest and attention then becomes focused on the subjectivity of the individual. It is out of this phenomenon the depth psychology was discovered. The very existence of depth psychology is a symptom of our time. Other evidences are in all the arts, in plays and novels. The most banal and commonplace individuals are described exhaustively in their most petty and personal aspects. A degree of value and attention is being given to inner subjectivity that never before happened. Actually, this tendency is a pointer toward things to come. If it is pursued to its inevitable conclusion, it cannot help but lead more and more people to a rediscovery of the lost suprapersonal categories within themselves. Part 2, the breakthrough. At a certain point in psychological development, usually after an intense alienation experience, the ego self-axis suddenly breaks into conscious view. The condition represented by figure 3 is realized. The ego becomes aware, experientially, of a transpersonal center to which the ego is subordinate. Jung describes this happening as follows. When a summit of life is reached, when the bud unfolds, and from the lesser, the greater emerges, then, as Nietzsche says, one becomes two, and the greater figure, which one always was, but which remained invisible, appears to the lesser personality with the force of a revelation. He who is truly and hopelessly little will always drag the revelation of the greater down to the level of his littleness. and will never understand that the day of judgment for his littleness has dawned. But the man who is inwardly great will know that the long-expected friend of his soul, the immortal one, has now really come to lead captive. Ephesians. That is, to seize hold of him by whom this immortal had always been confined and held prisoner, and to make his life flow into that greater life. A moment of deadliest peril. End of quote. Myth and religion provide many images which symbolize this moment of breakthrough. Whenever man consciously encounters a divine agency which assists, commands, or directs, we can understand it as an encounter of the ego with the self. The encounter generally occurs in the wilderness or in a fugitive state, i.e., alienation. Moses was a fugitive from the law, pasturing his father-in-law's sheep in the wilderness when Yahweh spoke to him from the burning bush and gave him his life assignment. Exodus 3. Jacob, obliged to run away from home because of Esau's wrath, dreams of the heavenly ladder in the wilderness and makes his covenant with God. Genesis 28. Francis Thompson, in his poem The Kingdom of God is Within You, uses this image. The angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone, and start a wing. 'Tis your estranged faces that miss the many splendid thing. But when so sad, thou canst not sadder, cry, and upon thy so sore loss shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder, pitched betwixt heaven and Charing Cross. Jonah provides another example. His initial encounter with Yahweh occurred in the midst of normal life, but could not be accepted, i.e., the ego was still too inflated to acknowledge the authority of the self. Only after futile efforts to escape, which lead him to ultimate despair in the belly of the whale, could Jonah acknowledge and accept the transpersonal authority of Yahweh. When a woman, or the anima in a man's psychology, encounters the self, it is often expressed as celestial impregnating power. Danae, while imprisoned by her father, is impregnated by Zeus through a golden shower and conceives Perseus. Similarly, the Annunciation to Mary is commonly depicted with impregnating, the same impregnating rays from heaven. A more psychological version of the same image is used by Bernini in his sculpture, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. A modern example of this theme is the striking dream of a woman, which was preceded by a long process of psychological effort. I see a young man, naked, glistening with sweat, who catches my attention first by his physical attitude. A combination of the falling motion of a pieta figure and the energetic release position of the famous Greek Discobolus. He's in a group of other men who, in an ambiguous way, seem to be supporting him. He stands out from them partly by the colour of his skin, bronze, and its texture, anointed, as it were, with sweat, but mainly by the fact that he had an enormous phallus in the form of a third extended leg. Oh, gee, sorry. I don't know this was going to be a bloody X rating. The man is in agony with the burden of his erection. This shows not only in the athletic expense of effort, musculature and sweat, but also in the contortion of his facial expression. My sympathy for his plight and my astonishment, admiration, intrigue at his male member draws me to him. We then join. Oh man! So look, this is just. I mean, it's one of those dreams, all right? We then join in intercourse, just as his entry is enough to. Oh, sorry. Just his entry is enough to cause me in an orgasm so deep and widespread that I can feel it. Oh man. Sorry. I can feel it in my ribs and lungs. Even when I wake up, it's full of pain and pleasure in an indistinguishable sensation. My entire insides are literally upset, and my womb specifically feels as though it has made an entire revolution inside out, or 180 degrees, I'm not sure which. Man. End of the dream. In addition to the discus thrower, picture 17, and Michelangelo's Peter, picture 18, the three-legged man also reminded the dreamer of an alchemical engraving and a picture of a three-footed sun wheel, picture 20, she had once seen. Thus, the dream figure is a rich condensation of multiple images. Let's look at the artwork, yeah. And meanings which warrant extensive amplification. Without pursuing the task here, a few observations can be noted. The dreamer has been penetrated and transformed by a masculine entity of creative power. He is an athlete of both body and spirit, brackets, St. Paul. He is associated with the ultimate spiritual principle, the sun, and also expresses the whole process of psychic transformation, the alchemical picture. For the dreamer, this dream initiated a whole new attitude and awareness of life. As its sexual imagery suggests, new levels of physical responsiveness were opened. In addition, new levels of physical responsiveness were opened. In addition, the whole sensation function, therefore largely unconscious, became available. Wow. What's that? All of a sudden she had sensations that she never knew were there, that she never knew she had. Most important of all was an increase in authentic individual autonomy and the emergence of very sizable creative talents. By the accompanying associations, it is evident that this dream expresses a decisive encounter not only with the animus, but also with the self. The triadic symbolism indicates emphasis on the process of concrete spatio-temporal realization in chapter 7. An outstanding example of the breakthrough of the ego-self axis is the conversion of the Apostle Paul. Jonah tried to escape his vocation by flight. Saul attempted to escape his by persecuting the representatives of his own destiny. The very intensity of his attack against the Christians betrayed his involvement with their cause, for, as Jung says, the important thing is what, brackets, a man talks about, not whether he agrees with it or not. So what a man talks about, not whether he agrees with it or not. That which one passionately hates is sure to represent an aspect of his own fate.